I'm sorry for subjecting you to my horrible voice. Pokémon Emerald starts like most games in the mainline Pokémon franchise. The local Pokémon professor asks if you're a boy or a girl, you tell him your name, and then you wake up in a truck. No music, just the sound of the truck's engine. You are alone. This sequence only lasts for about 15 seconds, after which you exit your truck and are greeted by the music of Little Root Town and your mother. But this is strange, isn't it? Normally in these games you start in your house, in your bed, somewhere warm. In the Hoenn games, you start alone in a truck. But that doesn't matter, because once those 15 seconds are up, it's back to business as usual. You set your clock, you watch your dad on TV, you meet your rival, you save Professor Birch from a wild Zigzagoon, and you get a Pokemon out of it. Normal stuff. All of this takes place around other people. Your mother, your rival, Professor Birch. You go and find and fight your rival on Route 103 after this, but even that feels safe. This is Pokemon Emerald's light tutorial sequence. After all that is said and done, your mother gives you the running shoes, and then she says this. To think that you have your very own Pokemon now. Your father will be overjoyed. But please, be careful. If anything happens, you can come home. You take your first steps out of town, now unconstrained, and the adventure begins. You're out here embarking into the great wide world, and that feels amazing. But it also, if you're like me, might make you feel just a little bit alone. It's not a sad loneliness. The music is upbeat, you've got a Pokemon by your side, the grass is green, there are other trainers dotting the routes, there's a town literally right there. But you are, well, alone. Your Pokemon is in its ball, you can't take it out at any time like you can in later games, it doesn't follow behind you. The other trainers are obstacles, not your friends. And although that town is close, the world ahead of you in your mind is so vast and unknown, that town may just be a speck on the map. It's the loneliness of independence. It's that feeling you get when you first leave home, and you kind of miss your mom, and you wonder if this was a mistake, but you know it isn't. You've got this. This is the sublime loneliness of Pokemon Emerald. You're not alone forever. Your rival is around, you fight them 4 more times over the course of the adventure. There's Wally, he's your catch tutorial, you fight him a few times too. There's Mr. Briny, the lovable sailor who ferries you around on his boat. And the various towns and cities you encounter are all filled with people and their own unique charms. But it's on the routes that you really feel it, especially as you get further from home. Wandering through grass as tall as you are, surfing across long stretches of ocean. I think the route that encapsulates this feeling the best is Route 113, which is near the top of the map and right next to a volcano. You step into it and immediately it's like nowhere else in the game. Ash falls slowly from the sky, the color palette is subdued, and then this starts playing? I love this. I've always been a very solitary person. I mostly keep to myself, I haven't had any nearby IRL friends in years. I like being alone. So embarking on a grand journey through the wilderness by myself like this feels right. I like to imagine my character camping out under the stars. I'd never do this in real life, I'm a huge wuss, but in a video game? I'm sold. Truth be told, I could probably have used any of the 2D Pokemon games to talk about this, and I'm sure anyone hearing this is going to have their own take on which game does it best. I nearly did Platinum solely because of Route 216. But the Hoenn games are where I started, so that's the bias that's at play here. Later games in the franchise don't give me the same sensation of loneliness. Pokemon X and Y give you 4 other rivals in Pokemon and Me. Sun and Moon have you constantly meeting other characters across your journey, as well as the accompaniment of ride Pokemon. Scarlet and Violet, while they have the largest, most open environments of the mainline games, also pair you with either Miraidon or Koraidon, and let you send out your Pokemon into the world at any time, and surround you with Pokemon in the field. And this is all great. It makes the story feel more interesting to have characters around all the time. It makes the world feel more real to have Pokemon everywhere. It's nice to be able to be accompanied by your Pokemon. But I miss the sense of loneliness. It made the early games feel special. Somehow the newer ones feel less mature by comparison, even as their complexity in storytelling has continually expanded. There's just something missing. I've only been to one convention in my life. It was the last year they were holding it. I'd always said I'd wanted to go to this convention in particular, so when they announced it would be the last one, I basically had no choice. The convention center was packed. Everyone else, it seemed, had thought the same thing I did. It was the highest attendance that con had ever seen in its 11 years it had been running. It was claustrophobic, to say the least. I knew people who were going, kind of, from a mutual discord and shared interests. But I never managed to work up the courage to actually go and meet any of these people until right before I was about to leave. So for most of the 4 days I spent there, even though I was surrounded by people, I was alone. Which I think is interesting because it means that loneliness as a concept isn't about our physical proximity to other people, it's about our emotional proximity to them. One can feel lonely in a crowd. One can feel content by themselves. I spent a lot of my time between panels at that convention in my hotel room. It was too busy in the convention center. Too noisy. Too lonely. Dark Souls is, without question, one of the most important games of the 2010s. It has dominated games discourse. It's reframed the way we talk about difficulty. It's the Dark Souls of platformers. It even spawned an entire new genre, the Souls-like, although perhaps that honor should go more to Demon Souls than the follow-up that overshadowed it. Dark Souls is, I think, a very lonely game, which is weird because it has multiplayer. Sorta. Dark Souls' online features are very interesting. Most of the time they encourage cooperation towards the end goal of beating the game, whether indirectly through bloodstains that show you the moment before another player's death, messages you can leave for other players, or literally through the ability to summon other players to help you. The multiplayer also works in other, subtler ways. Occasionally a phantom will appear in front of you, a vision of another player in another world, going through the same trials as you are. You are not truly alone on your journey, so long as you have an internet connection anyway. So why does the game feel so lonely? Because it is. You are alone most of the time. You face traps, hordes of enemies, twisting level geometries, whatever the hell this is. The entire world is against you in Dark Souls. These moments of seeing other players' phantoms, of engaging in jolly cooperation, are brief, fleeting. Much of it you will have to face yourself. Being able to summon helpers also requires you to be human, which is a double-edged sword because it opens you up to being invaded. Other players may journey to your world, arriving as a red phantom with the sole purpose of hunting you down and killing you. For new players, this can discourage them from seeking out help, leading to them enforcing their own single-player experience, at least until they become stronger and more confident. On another track, the story itself is obscure. Famously, much of the lore of Dark Souls is cryptic, hidden in item descriptions that you may never read. You face forces in your journey which you may not fully comprehend. The game is almost dreamlike in how little most people will understand it by the final boss. I certainly didn't. I had no idea what was going on in my first playthrough. Entire YouTube careers have been launched untangling this stuff. There are NPCs in Dark Souls. You'll run across them occasionally, and several of them have their own little storylines that you can, if you're clever, or you've read a guide, follow to their conclusions. But again, these encounters are brief notes in a wider song, and that song sounds like this. Like I was at that convention, you are among people in Dark Souls, but the world is so oppressive in its decaying, dying splendor that you still feel very much alone. It is you who must choose whether to link the fire. Your choice, not Celeste's, not France's, not Gwyn's. Yours. Fallout New Vegas is my favorite game of all time. It can also be sublimely lonely. Like in Pokémon, the settlements are populated. You are among people. In fact, this was perhaps the most lively the wasteland had been up to that point. A major theme in New Vegas is rebuilding, of choosing what path the future of civilization in the post-apocalypse will take. It feels more alive than 3 does, at least to me. But there is so much more space in Fallout New Vegas. 3's map was very dense, with a lot of cramped ruins, particularly around DC. New Vegas is much smaller, but it's still huge, and a lot of the main quest is spent traveling from place to place in a big letter U across the map, which incentivizes you to spend so much more time on the road than if you go straight to New Vegas from Goodsprings. And landscapes, my god! Wide open vistas of dry dust and yellowing grass, broken only by roads and mountains and the occasionally dilapidated shack. Being by yourself in such an open, exposed place is just... And yes, you can take companions, but the first one you can get is EDE and Prim, and you need to collect parts or have high repair or science stats, and by the time I had what I needed, I usually forgot about him. The second you meet is Cass at the Mojave Outpost, but you need to go to Crimson Caravans to recruit her, and that's almost to New Vegas. So the first companion you're likely to get is actually Boone, and he's in Novak. So even if you take the earliest possible companions, you'll still have a long stretch of lonesome wandering to do. Boone was my first companion, by the way. I took him and Rex my first time through. Never used the radio either, so for a lot of it was just the haunting background music and the sound of my character's feet hitting the ground. This sense of loneliness is actually enhanced by the brief encounters on the road that interrupt it. Caravans of merchants wander the same cracked asphalt, with guards and sometimes settlers. You may encounter one on the road, sometimes you'll have to save them from wildlife or the Legion, sometimes they'll just pass on by you, or you'll trade with them, or you could try and attack them. In certain places you may find people by the side of your trail as well, and they may have quests for you, or be related to quests you haven't found yet. Sometimes they'll approach you, other times you'll approach them, sometimes you'll just give them a nod as you pass on by. But these encounters are brief, and serve to highlight what came before and what comes after them, which is you, alone in the Mojave, a single courier against forces you don't even comprehend yet. The world is lived in, it is populated, yes, but you are still far from civilization out here in the wasteland. You are alone among people, but you are alone. Celeste is a game about climbing a mountain. Actually, it's a game about a lot of things, but that's what you're physically doing, climbing to the top of the game's titular peak. You play as Madeline, a young woman who is dealing with a lot. And you are doing it alone, at least at first. After briefly talking with the crazy old lady at the base of the mountain, Madeline begins her ascent. The first real area of Celeste Mountain is the Forsaken City, the remains of a modern-looking city built on the side of the mountain, long abandoned, its metal structures slowly being covered with snow. I am a writer. I write fiction mostly, and I've noticed that in a lot of my stories there is a common motif. Winter, snow, ice, a punishing cold that stands against the protagonists, or forces them inside, or just chills them to their bones. I associate cold with being alone, being emotionally distant, being in a hostile environment, whether physically or emotionally. It's not always negative, sometimes it's a couple stuck inside on a cold day. Other times it's two people fighting for their lives to reach their destination through a blizzard. The Forsaken City is very cold. The area is bathed in a palette of blues and grays and whites. Snow gently falls and coats the many, many spikes on the ground. It's not a blizzard, far from it, but it is there. The climb is grueling. It will get harder as Madeline's journey continues, and that's the point. Celeste is a hard game, intentionally. The themes of the story would not work as well if it wasn't. She will get stuck on the same screen, she will be thrown into spikes, she will fall. The music is beautiful, by the way. It's subdued, a light piano playing in the background, but it is hopeful. And then, after a number of screens, you meet someone on your climb. Theo. You talk to Theo at his camp, in front of a crashed airplane of all things. He has a tent, a fire, warmth where there wasn't any, not just physically but emotionally. Theo is a warm person. Madeline's conversation with him is a delight. And in this way, Celeste uses the loneliness of the climb to make this interaction work. Just a conversation in front of a fire, but it feels meaningful, feels real. By enduring the cold and the spikes, you've earned this moment of warmth. The climb only gets tougher from here. The level isn't over even. There's still much more to go, more to do, alone. But this moment of respite sticks with you, and when Madeline climbs to the top, builds her own fire and settles down, meters away from a memorial to the people who didn't make it up the mountain, it feels like you've accomplished something. But this isn't all there is to Celeste, because as you climb you meet more characters like Madeline and Mr. Oshiro. Theo comes back several times, as does the old woman from the beginning, and slowly, as Madeline becomes closer to these characters, as she interacts with them more, the climb starts to feel less and less lonely. Is it any surprise that, once the mountain is climbed and Madeline has reached a new stage in her journey of personal growth, that all these characters meet up at the base of the mountain to eat strawberry pie? In this way, Celeste uses these periods of loneliness and togetherness, of cold and warmth, to emphasize the journey that the characters, and you, go on. It's a storytelling tool that Celeste uses perfectly. The climb is yours to make, and you must do much of it by yourself, but there are others making that climb too. So are you actually alone at all? While single-player games are, overall, a solo exercise, Many don't feel lonely. Audio logs, voices over the radio telling you what to do, a lot of games don't allow you to feel like you're alone. And that's fine. I don't feel lonely in Bioshock because I don't need to feel lonely in Bioshock. It needed these things to tell its story as masterfully as it did. But games that do allow you to feel alone, that play with feeling lonely, use it to enhance the atmosphere or the story or just to make you feel something, I just can't help but feel like there's something interesting there. They fascinate me. Got me to write a whole video essay on them. Bioshock's never made me want to do that, and I love Bioshock. The ability to feel lonely among our own kind is, I think, a very human thing. That may not be true, I'm sure there are other species that display similar behaviors, but there is something human about that sense of perceived isolation. It's something that shouldn't logically exist, and yet our fleshy meat brains do it anyway, for better or for worse. Games, I think, can be a way of exploring these sorts of human sensations, whether that's intended by the developers or not. That's part of what makes them interesting to talk about. It's one reason that we can even consider them to be art. And it makes me feel a little less alone.